This is CD4Peace.
In recent years, conflict has become the predominant factor causing food insecurity. It drives food insecurity by causing economic recession, driving up inflation, increasing unemployment, and disrupting the functioning of essential services. Humanitarian action can provide a lifeline for people in need, but also faces numerous challenges. First of all, insecurity from ongoing hostilities or a breakdown in law and order, or bureaucratic and other impediments imposed by belligerents. If belligerents would comply with international humanitarian law, this can play a role in avoiding or at least reducing food insecurity. The prohibition of starvation of civilians, in fact, as a method of warfare, is included in the international humanitarian law. But first of all, we should ask, what constitutes starvation? This is Emanuela, and welcome to the 4 Minutes for Peace podcast series. In this episode, we will be delving into another aspect of what we work here at CD4Peace, which is peacebuilding. Stay tuned to know more about conflict-induced food insecurity and the war crime of starvation of civilians. Starvation has been given a wider interpretation than the literal meaning of depriving of food and water, encompassing also the privation of other goods essential to the survival in a particular context, such as medicine, medical equipment, or blankets. Let's make it clear through the example of South Sudan. Despite possessing some of the most agriculturally productive land in the world, civil war in South Sudan has created a humanitarian crisis, leading to the displacement of nearly 4 million people. In the 1983 and 2005 civil war, the government of South Sudan, allied militia, and the Sudan People's Liberation Army regularly used starvation as a method of war. Combatants destroyed food, farmland, and also prevented desperate people from foraging for wild food or finding casual labor, resulting in one of the highest mortality rates ever recorded in modern times. Not too long after the 2005 ceasefire, the 2013 multi-sided civil war exacerbated the starvation crisis. International humanitarian law prohibits starvation of civilians as a warfare. However, it's not very clear on the situation it covers. Thus, the law also covers situations where, although not the purpose of the party, the starvation of civilian population is the foreseeable consequence of a particular action. For example, in a besieged city where the party does not allow for the entry of commodities because it wants to starve the fighters, knowing that this is also going to cause starvation of civilians. Does this constitute a breach of international humanitarian law? Unfortunately, law is not clear on this point. Another problem is that despite growing concern over food insecurity in armed conflict and the recognition of international humanitarian law rules as a lines of defense against starvation in armed conflict, accountability is difficult to achieve. Additionally, where clear violations of international humanitarian law have been committed, it is often impossible to identify a clear perpetrator, restricting the viability of accountability procedure. To address this, it is imperative to have a wider discussion on the obligations of the party to an armed conflict, which are broader than this act which result in individual criminal responsibility, and to leverage international humanitarian law concept to fill lacunas in the law. Finally, the international community must elevate the public and political profile of the crime and make it so morally deplorable that its usage is no longer normalized. This will build political pressure to fight impunity for starvation as a method of warfare.
4 Minutes for Peace, podcast produced by CD4Peace, Cultural Diversity and Sustainable Development for Peace, organization established in Geneva since 2018.